Halo, halo, dobry wieczór, witajcie. Przepraszam za spóźnienie, poślizg. No tak, ale zacznijmy od tego, że mamy piękny wieczór. To jest Radio Szczumic. Ja się nazywam Michał Szczukiewicz, zapraszam na program Poza Głównym Nurtem. Przepraszam Was za opóźnienie, ale nie sądziłem, że robienie napisów do filmu zajmie tak dużo czasu. Bardzo czasochłonne, dużo bardziej się opłaca robić lektora i raczej tego się będę trzymał, ale chciałem przetestować tę formę nagrania. A o co chodzi? Chodzi o Alexa Newmana i jego jeden z ostatnich programów. Powrócił do tematu wirusa, więc warto przypomnieć ten temat i pokazać, że John Birch Society, jak i Alex Newman nie zmienili zdania, wciąż uważają wirusa, tak samo go oceniają, w przeciwieństwie do Idź Pod Prąd, które kłamało, że zmieniają zdanie. Więc jeszcze raz to tutaj pokazuję. To, że Alex Newman nie pojawia się już w Idź Pod Prąd, też jest bardzo wymowne. Pracuję nad tym, żeby Alex udzielił też wywiadu tutaj bezpośrednio dla nas. A póki co prezentuję Wam jego przedostatnie nagranie z serii Behind the Deep State. Nagranie puszczam z obniżoną prędkością 0,88 prędkości, bo Alex mówi bardzo szybko i wyświetlenie tych wszystkich napisów jest problematyczne. Ale cóż, już nie przedłużam. Zapraszam na film, a po filmie jeszcze parę ciekawostek.
The deep state is once again hyping the deadly COVID pandemic. You're all gonna die. There's a second wave coming. We need more lockdowns. We need to steal more of your freedom. Stay tuned to hear why they're lying once again. Hey guys, Alex Newman here with Behind the Deep State. Thank you so much for joining us. We have got the establishment's propaganda organs are just going full speed ahead with their dead horse. The idea that we all need to go run and hide from the very scary coronavirus pandemic. Oh my goodness, we're going to have a second wave and all the rest of it. Well, there is a lot of evidence to suggest that we are once again being deceived and deceived on a massive scale. Let's start with Dr. Mike Yeadon. He was the former vice president and the chief science officer for Pfizer, one of the big pharmaceutical companies. And he has been very noisy in explaining that this second wave is a media manufactured fraud. He says, and I quote, "Were it not for the test data that you get from the TV all the time, you would rightly conclude that the pandemic was over, as nothing much has happened. Of course, people go to the hospital moving into the autumn flu season, but there is no science to suggest that a second wave should happen." In fact, what he said is happening is fraudulent testing results are being used to manufacture a second wave where there is no second wave. Now, on September 10th, the CDC released their latest data, and I think the data is very suspicious, to put it mildly. But let's look at their data for a moment. According to the CDC itself, a child and a young person is significantly more likely to die from being struck by lightning than from COVID. And yet, all these parents who watch too much television are hiding their children in the basement and covering their face up with these deadly face masks and face diapers and all the rest of it. It is unbelievable what's happening. And according to Dr. Fauci, the king propagandist of the coronavirus hysteria, the seasonal flu, a severe seasonal influenza, has a case fatality rate of approximately 0.1%. Well, for the overwhelming majority of people who might get COVID, the fatality rate is significantly below 0.1%. And yet, we've destroyed our economy. We have surrendered so many of our liberties, especially in Democrat states. Unbelievable what's happening, folks, here. The more you dig, the more you realize we're being deceived. The CDC very quietly released their data showing that only 6% of the supposed COVID deaths were actually just COVID deaths. The overwhelming majority of those were multiple other factors contributing to it. In fact, the CDC said the average was 2.6 other comorbidities. These are other things that contributed to killing you. Now, the original panic came from a phony study, a phony model funded by Bill Gates that claimed that there would be 2.2 million deaths in America from coronavirus. Obviously, that was a fraud. Obviously, we were deceived, and yet everybody's acting like nothing ever happened, at least in the fake media. Now, I am of the opinion that this coronavirus was engineered in a communist Chinese laboratory. Massive amounts of evidence to suggest that, including multiple scientists, multiple whistleblowers who've come out and said it. In fact, the Epic Times, my friend Josh Phillip did a phenomenal documentary on the origins of the CCP virus, and it goes through the massive amounts of evidence that this monstrosity was engineered in the Wuhan Institute of Virology, the Communist Chinese bioweapons lab. I think that is a very, very plausible explanation. In fact, I think that's what the evidence points to. I also think there was some very serious involvement from Americans, very much including Dr. Fauci, who sent millions of our tax dollars to this laboratory during his tenure at the NIH. Now, on this subject of the tests, right, because they're using these phony tests to argue that we have this crazy second wave and that it's all Trump's fault and we're all doomed unless we give up even more of our freedom and destroy our economy even more. Well, the president of Tanzania got a little bit suspicious, and this was widely reported even in the mainstream news. So he had a goat and a papaya tested for COVID-19, and surprise, they both tested positive. How can this be? Well, rather than explain it to you myself, I'd like to defer to the man who actually invented the test. His name is Dr. Kerry Mullins, and he passed away just a few short months before the coronavirus pandemic began. And he invented these. He won the Nobel Prize for this PCR test. And I want to show you a video because what he says is very interesting. Check this out.
How do they misuse PCR to estimate all these supposed free viral RNAs that may or may not be there?
I think misuse PCR is not quite. I don't think you can misuse PCR. No, the results, the interpretation of it. See, if you can say, if they could find this virus in you at all, and with PCR, if you do it well, you can find almost anything in anybody. It starts making you believe in the sort of Buddhist notion that everything is contained in everything else, right? I mean, because if you can amplify one single molecule up to something that you can really measure, which PCR can do, then there's just very few molecules that you don't have at least one single one of them in your body, okay?
Did you catch that? Okay. These PCR tests are not meant to be used to diagnose whether you have an illness. What they do is they take even one molecule of coronavirus and they amplify it to the point where it's something that you can measure. That doesn't mean you have COVID. That doesn't mean you're infectious. That doesn't mean you're going to die. It doesn't mean any of those things. In fact, as he says very clearly, this almost makes you believe in the Buddhist idea that there's everything in everything, right? You can find anything you want if you're using these PCR tests. If we had more time, we'd go into more depth. But I think we are being deceived on a massive scale. And he said clearly, you don't use PCR tests to diagnose somebody with an infection or with a disease. That's not what they are for. Okay, this is the guy who invented them. All right, so let's not be stupid here, folks. There's an interesting article in the Daily Mail, and the CDC has kind of confirmed that they're not tracking influenza cases anymore. It's happening all over the world. Here's a headline from the Daily Mail. Check this out. Has COVID killed off the flu? Experts pose the intriguing question as influenza cases nosedive by 98% across the globe. Folks, what do you think the odds are that 98% decline in influenza cases around the world? Come on. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't even have to be very intelligent to recognize that we are being deceived, folks. In Florida, this comes from ABC 15 News. Deaths incorrectly attributed to COVID-19 in Florida County. A guy who died with a gunshot wound to the head, he was COVID. A guy who died in a motorcycle accident, he was COVID. Lady who fell down the steps and broke her hip and died, also COVID. Right? Are you starting to get the picture here, guys? We are being deceived on a massive scale. I want to show you this chart here for the death rates between Sweden and America. Now, I lived in the People's Republic of Sweden for most of the last decade, not on purpose. I don't recommend it. We actually fled the tyranny only to come to America and find out that the tyranny was about to get even more intense with the coronavirus stuff. So the Swedes usually do everything wrong, but they did do something right, and that is when the COVID pandemic hit, they ignored the Communist Chinese controlled World Health Organization, and they said, no, we're not going to destroy our economy. No, we're not going to force everyone to wear face diapers. In fact, they told people face diapers were dangerous. Don't wear face diapers. They didn't do the anti-social distancing mandates. They didn't do the school closings and the economic shutdowns and all the rest of it. In fact, you could walk through Stockholm at virtually any point throughout this pandemic, and if you weren't watching the fake media, you wouldn't even know there was anything going on. Check out these numbers, folks. These are the mortality rates for Sweden in yellow and the United States in blue. If you compare Sweden with European countries, check out this next graph here. You see that Sweden is almost at the bottom on the 7-day average per million of coronavirus cases. Okay, that's very interesting. Why, right? And some of the countries that had the harshest lockdowns, you see, are actually not doing so well at all. Well, here is some data from the United States, and I want to spend a minute on these because this stuff is important, folks. All right, guys. So I want to show you these graphs. My home state of Florida. Born in Miami. Spent a lot of my time in Florida, so I've been looking closely at what's been going on in Florida. I want to show you these graphs. These come from the Tallahassee report. This first one: daily new coronavirus cases, 7-day average trend line. What do you notice? All the way up through October 29th, cases are absolutely plummeting. Okay, here's current COVID hospitalizations. What do we notice? Cases are absolutely plummeting. Let's go to here. Daily fatalities, 7-day average trend line. What do we see? Absolutely plummeting. And yet, what do you hear from the fake media? Oh my goodness, second wave, we're all going to die. We need more lockdowns. Right, guys, we are being deceived on such a massive scale. It's hard to even know where to start with. Now, they are destroying the economy, right? We've got 60 million people who have lost their jobs since this insanity started. That's over 1/3 of all the jobs in America. We've got a wave of bankruptcies coming, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of small businesses, medium business, even big businesses will not make it out of this. We've got maybe 1 in 4, maybe 1 in 5 churches will never reopen again. According to the Bureau of Economic Analysis, in the second quarter of 2020, real GDP declined by 33%, folks. That makes the Great Depression look like a speed bump, okay? But not everybody's doing poorly. Check out the stock chart for Amazon, right? Amazon, the owner is, of course, Bilderberger Jeff Bezos, and he, of course, owns the Washington Compost, one of the leading hysterics when it comes to promoting this coronavirus insanity, right? Demonizing Republicans who don't agree with the lockdown, demonizing people who don't agree with the shutdowns, attacking Trump constantly, calling for more strict lockdowns. Isn't that funny that the guy who owns the Washington Compost has doubled his wealth? Look at these stock prices, guys. Stock prices increased about 100% since these lockdowns started. Even Walmart, right? Your small business is not essential. Your church is not essential. But Walmart and abortions are very essential. And so Walmart prices for their shares have gone up about 50% since the lockdown started. Guys, are you starting to get the picture here? We are being played on a massive, massive scale. As long as the deep state keeps pushing this coronavirus insanity, we will keep exposing it. If YouTube takes this video down, don't worry. You can find us in other places. We're going to be putting these videos everywhere, guys, because we're tired of the censorship. Now they're censoring Donald Trump when he points out that the coronavirus is less deadly than the flu. Facebook takes his post down. Twitter puts a note on it saying he's a liar. I mean, on and on and on, guys. They planned all this out. You know, we've talked on this show about the Event 201, where they talked about how they needed to censor social media when this hypothetical novel coronavirus comes out of China. Oh, wow, that happened a few months later. Fancy that. Funded by the World Economic Forum and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. And, of course, the Rockefellers. called about all this in 2010 with their scenarios for the future of technology and international development, right? They said, if a pandemic breaks out, well, we got to do it communist China style. And by the way, guys, they said something really interesting in that lockstep scenario. They said even after the pandemic faded, this more authoritarian control and oversight of citizens and their activities stuck and even intensified. All right, guys, that's all we have time for today. But remember, the deep state is lying to you. They're lying to you about everything. They're lying to you about global warming. They're lying to you about the election. They're lying to you about coronavirus. They're lying to you about the lockdowns. They're lying to you about the Constitution. If they could lie to you about the color of the sky, they would lie about that too. If CNN told me the sun went up this morning, I'd go look at the window and check. Guys, you're being deceived. Okay? Don't believe the lies. Do the research for yourself. I'm Alex Newman. You're watching Behind the Deep State. Thank you so much for tuning in, folks. Follow us on all the social media outlets. Check us out on Parler. Go find us on the alternative video platforms. Make sure you're going to thenewamerican.com and signing up for our daily headlines. If you haven't yet subscribed to the print magazine, I highly encourage you to do that, folks. They cannot censor our print magazine, so you don't have to worry about Facebook and the lunatics at Twitter and Google hiding the truth from you. God bless you all, and I look forward to next week. If you liked this video, I'm sure you'll really like this one right here. We've got a whole series exposing the deep state, so you can click over there. You can watch one right now. Really, what are you waiting for? Go check it out. I'm Alex Newman with Behind the Deep State. Thanks again, and God bless.
Tak, wracamy. Bardzo ciekawy program. Jak widzicie, ocena taka jak i moja, tak jak i w zasadzie wasza, większości z was, chyba że pierwszy raz jesteś na tym kanale, to może nie wiesz do końca, co mam na myśli. Dlatego szybko chciałem pokazać, co mam na myśli. To jest ten program. Wszystkie linki będą w opisie albo już są. To jest program, który właśnie tłumaczyłem. Tutaj macie na przykład na portalu Minds, na którym też wrzucam rzeczy, przy okazji trochę popromuję alternatywę. Jest też na YouTube ten program. To jest, załączę link zarówno z YouTube'a, jak i z Mindsa, żeby nie miał nikt problemów. To jest poza głównym nurtem z sierpnia program, z 31 sierpnia pandemia testów. O tym między innymi mówił Alex Newman. Jeśli chcecie rozszerzyć to, o czym on teraz opowiadał, to właśnie pokazuję w jaki sposób. Tutaj świeżutki z 22 października, tajemnice zniewolenia, początki Światowego Forum Ekonomicznego. Tak, w jaki sposób Forum Ekonomiczne się zaczynało. Tę serię będę jeszcze kontynuował, bo Światowe Forum Ekonomiczne finansuje całą tą zabawę. Tak samo zresztą jak Rockefellerowie i plan Lockstep, o którym mówił Alex. To jest program też bardzo świeży, 29 października. Event 201 Operation Warp Speed to też bardzo ciekawe programy i wydarzenia, które miały miejsce. To jest z 20 maja program. Tutaj już do archiwów mocnych zerkamy kwiecień 17, czyli jak zaplanowanego Wielkiego K, Event 201. Gatesgate, czyli Gates, Chiny, WHO, jedno zło, 20 kwietnia, 24 kwietnia, Fauci, Gates, Rockefeller, NICH, CDC, ONZ, WHO, czyli Fauci po nicce do kłębka. Bardzo ciekawy program. Chyba program, z którego jestem cały czas do tej pory najbardziej zadowolony. Albo jeden z tych, których jestem najbardziej zadowolony. Ten wyjątkowo polecam. Wciąż aktualny, wciąż niezmiennie aktualny. Tutaj program o IDE 2020, czyli o Billu Gatesie i Microsoftie i ich planach na też zniewolenie poprzez chipy i te elektroniczne zabawki. To wszystkie linki są. Pokazuje to też, że ja o tych rzeczach cały czas mówię, że moje oceny zgadzają się z ocenami prezentowanymi przez Alexa Newmana i do tego jeszcze raz, tak delikatnie już na koniec, daję kontekst Idź pod prąd i pokazuję, jak bardzo oszukowali ludzi w kontekście właśnie Alexa Newmana, John Birch Society i jak oszukują ludzi wciąż w kontekście tego wielkiego K. Póki co dziękuję pięknie za uwagę, przepraszam za opóźnienie, za wszelkie niedociągnięcia techniczne też w tym filmie. Wiem, że tam z napisami mogło być dużo lepiej. No i tak jak mówię, były bardzo czasochłonne, dlatego opóźnienie. Dziękuję już, przepraszam i Z Bogiem. Do usłyszenia, do zobaczenia wkrótce.